it's a great honor to have you here in the interview for our self-healing conference, online conference. A very warm welcome.
Thank you, it's good to be here.
Yeah, Anne Wilson Schaef, she has a doctor in psychotherapy.
Clinical
psychology. She is an internationally known author, seminar leader, and speaker. She has published so far 16 books, is that right?
I think a bit more maybe, but somewhere around there.
And some of them even New York Times bestsellers.
Yes.
And she is half Cherokee. And she has studied the world of native cultures extensively. And her Lakota name means her job is to see the big picture.
No, my Lakota name is Wian Mamblishkawakan, which is sacred white eagle woman.
Mm-hmm.
And the eagle, the role of the eagle is to see the big picture. And that seems to be what I do in spite of myself. So I'm not enamored with details that much. It's the bigger picture that's important to me.
One of the main principles of your work, as you emphasize a lot, is to be honest, honesty. And for me, I mean, I'm starting with this statement. For me, to be honest, it's really exciting to interview you, and I fall always in this role of like, I want to please, you are that high, and I'm there, and I feel like this schoolgirl trying to please you, or trying to please the teacher. So,
well, I'm sorry to hear that. I come from a place that we're all equal. I may know more than you do about something. I may have more degrees than you have, or you may have more money than I have. And from my perspective, we are equals. And I always find that I can learn something from anybody. You know, it reminds me of one time I was traveling with a friend. I'd just done a speaking engagement, and I was going to another one. She was accompanying me just for company. We were in Florida, and there's a lot of backcountry in Florida. People think of Florida as the resorts, and well, there's a lot of backcountry where just kind of hillbillies live. And we were running out of gas, and we saw this little teeny gas station with one pump and a little kind of shack. And I said, we better get gas. We don't know when the next station is. And we stopped, and here's this old man, and he's got a pair of overalls on. Do you know what overalls are there? Yeah. And he had no shirt, just overalls. And he was a little grubby, and he was picking at his guitar. And so when I went in and got gas, went in to pay the bill, and I came back out, and he was playing a gospel song and humming it. And so I sat down, and I had sung in the choir in church since I was a child. I knew all the gospel songs, and I knew all the verses. And so we started singing, and we sang for over an hour. And he told me his story. He told me how he'd been an alcoholic and wasted his life, and he found the Lord, he said. And he said now he spent his time singing praise, and he played on street corners and sang every day, and his daughter owned the gas station, so he sang there and played. And when I got back to the car, my friend said, what were you doing with that dirty old man? And I said, we were singing. And I still remember that, obviously. It was such a beautiful experience, and seeing how he was doing what he needed to do, and he felt whole with it. So you go ahead and be silly if you want to about acting like we're unequal, but I'm not going to, okay? That's up to you. It's your problem, not mine. Appreciate your honesty, though.
Thank you. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your childhood. How did it look like? How did you feel as a child?
My great-grandmother was my primary parent, and she lived with us, with my mother and me when I was very little. And she was a healer, a medicine woman, and she was one of the gentlest people I ever knew. And we lived in a very, very small town in Oklahoma, in Indian country. And so I was surrounded by Cherokee people, which I think is very important as I look back. And she taught me I think from the time I was in the womb, really, about healing and about how to be. And my mother, too, was very much a part of the picture. And she was a poet and a writer and a very talented woman. And she and my grandmother were kind of like this because my grandmother's only daughter had died in childbirth, giving birth to my mother. And I think they never worked that out. But somehow didn't matter with raising me. And she just was constantly teaching me the Indian way is that, I remember an old Aboriginal saying this to me, that by the time Aboriginal child is a year or two old, they have the equivalent of a university education. And I don't know whether my grandmother started teaching me in the womb or not, but the Aboriginals do. And it's just constant teaching. And then my father married my mother when I was 3 and didn't want me to know that he wasn't my natural father. So it was a family secret for a long time. But I knew it because I heard the people in town talking. And so I knew he didn't want me to know it, so I just didn't matter. He was my dad. And he was always teaching me. He was a very talented engineer. They both went to this little school that probably had 30 students. You know, that's where they graduated from high school. And we were all really poor. My dresses used to be made out of flour sacks. And back in the 30s, when I was young, they had, you got your grain and your flour and your sugar in cotton bags. And my grandpa owned the store. And he'd empty out the bags, and then I'd get the choice of the best prints, and you washed them out, and all the printing came out. But you had like a piece of cotton material. So my grandmother made her underwear out of them, and my mother made my dresses out of them. And so we started out, and I feel really privileged to have been poor. And we didn't think of ourselves as poor. We just didn't have a lot of money. It's a very different feeling than thinking of yourself as poor, I think. So, and the town where we lived was small, and it was like a womb. Everybody in town was involved in raising me. You hear it takes a village to raise a child. And we really had that. We knew when Mrs. Laudermilk across the street baked, and we all kind of migrated to her house on Monday when she baked. And then the woman up the street always churned her butter on Tuesday, so we migrated up there. And it was idyllic. And as I look back, I think what I got from that was the world is a safe place. You're responsible for yourself. I knew I couldn't go across the highway. I knew I couldn't go down where the train was. I knew what my boundaries were. And I felt safe, and everybody looked after me. And I feel like I've brought that into the world. When I did my internship at Bellevue Hospital in New York in clinical psychology, I was the only psychologist that year who hadn't been attacked on the criminally insane ward. And I worked there, and at that point I was slim and young and pretty and little, and whenever someone started to come at me, I just looked at them and I said, "Stop," and they did. And so I think that, that was really, I just feel so lucky. I have such gratitude for where I was raised and the way I was raised, and it's so clearly, it's so deeply in who I am. And in so many ways, it was very sheltered, but it also made me strong. And I think I carry that with me, that rearing and that childhood.
And your interest on addiction, this was not based on your childhood experience. It was more influenced by your education, wasn't it?
I think it was more influenced by my experience. In my education, I have a doctorate in psychology, and I had almost nothing about addiction in my training. But the way I've always worked with people is to work with what's there and what I see, and there were some things that I just didn't understand, and I realized long after I was working. I had a private practice, and I was seeing patients regularly, and I had a 2-year waiting list, and people moved to that town to work with me, which I found kind of embarrassing, and but I was always trying to learn more, see what I was missing, and I realized that there was something that I was seeing that I didn't know what was, and I hadn't been taught about it. And at one point I was living with a group of women and our children in a house. It was during my feminist heyday, and we were all supporting each other and helping raise the children. And there was one woman in the house that was just different and seemed like always throwing things off kilter in some way. And I thought, what is this? What is this? Nothing in my training as a clinical psychologist was helping me. And then one day I thought, she's an alcoholic. And I had no idea what that meant. I just had noticed in myself, I noticed that when we all went out to eat or something and she ordered a second drink, I felt something. I don't want her to have a second drink, and it seemed silly at the time. And so I said to her, "I think you're an alcoholic." And she said, "Yes." And I thought, what do I do? And I'd been hearing about, it was just the time we were starting an awareness of alcoholism in the United States. And so I called people in Minnesota because I thought of that as the capital of alcoholism in the country, with Hazelden, being the main center. And so I called Hazelden, and they said, "Well, she needs to go to treatment." And I said, "Where? What? How?" And so she went to treatment. And then they said, "Well, you're as sick as she is because you're a codependent." And I said, "What's that?" And I said, "I'm not as sick as she is." And they said, "You need help." And I thought, I don't need help. But they said I did, so I was going to be cooperative. So I rounded up. I told my kids, I said, "We're going to treatment. We've all been affected by this." And my son said, "I don't want to go." And I said, "I know it, but you're going." And then all the people in the house, I said, "We all have to go to treatment because we've all been affected. They say we've all been affected. We all have to go to." So everybody in the house agreed. Then I called my ex-husband, and I said, I think you better go too, because goodness knows you've been affected, and even though we're separated and divorced, and I think you should go." And he said, "Well, I'm willing to do it, And so I said, "Okay." And then I thought, I wonder how I've affected my clients. And so I invited any of my clients who wanted to go to treatment with us to go to treatment. And there were 13 of us. And there were so many of us that no treatment center would take us. So we paid the staff, rented a motel, and we all went through treatment together, with my son laying on the floor saying a mantra of, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't. And I really learned a lot, you know. And I started just like, I was voracious to learn about alcoholism and addiction and how it worked and how it happened. And I went through my own patient list, and I had 4 or 5 active alcoholics that I was seeing as a therapist and had no idea at all. And the way I do things is, if there's something that comes in my sphere that interests me, I learn everything I can about it. So, you know, everywhere I went, I talked to people. Do you know about alcoholism? Do you know what they're doing? Do you know what this means? You know, and I just kept growing and learning. And then I was giving a speech one day to about 2,000 people, a bunch of people in Minnesota. That's the way they say it there, Minnesota. And the words came out of my mouth. I said, you know, the culture in which we live functions exactly like an active alcoholic. We have an addictive culture. It's culture. And when I said that, I was like, wow. And you could have heard a pin drop with those people there. And then all of a sudden they were all on their feet saying, yes, yes, you know. And I thought, I get goosebumps even saying, and I thought, this is right. And that's when I wrote the New York Times bestseller, When Society Becomes an Addict. And it was a 1-to-1 fit, that the culture itself functions like an active addict. And I still think that's very, very important. I think it's true of most or all Western cultures, for sure. And so that made me look at a much broader picture than just the individual person and what we're doing. And now I think maybe I would say it is that most people use a medical model and they focus on the individual and the characteristics of an individual alcoholic, but they don't really understand the ism, which is much bigger than the individual alcoholic or the symptoms that, and I even came to the conclusion that I think we developed addictions so that we can tolerate the culture that we have made. It's so awful, Western culture, and it's the way it functions, and so destructive to the human spirit, to the planet, to nature, that we have to have something to take the edge off of what we've created so we can stand it. And so I think we drink and we use drugs and we try to leave. And during that time, I came to see that the person who's best adjusted to Western culture is the person who's not dead because the culture needs you to perform the work of the culture, but not alive. Because if you're too much alive, you won't fit. You're a sore thumb. And so we've developed a culture where adjustment to the culture means basically being a zombie. And there's nothing like drugs, alcohol, sex, money, whatever you want to use to numb your aliveness so that you fit in. It makes sense to me that way. And sometimes I change what I think, but I think this one's sticky. I think this one's very true from what I see all over the world.
So that means we are all addictive, and what treatment do we need?
I can remember years ago when someone was interviewing me like this, and they said, well, if we're all addictive, then that's normal, and so it doesn't mean anything. And I said, that is so crazy. That is so crazy. You're thinking like that. Yes, I think we are. I think we all adjust to an addictive. At first I called it the white male system. My first book, Women's Reality, I talked about 3 systems. The white male system being the dominant system of the culture, and the reactive female system being women trying to be who they are as defined by the culture, and that's inferior and etc. And then an emerging female system, which I saw as women trying to become who we are and not as defined from outside by the males. And I could see that one-to-one correlation. And so I began to call it the addictive system, the addictive culture. And then to me, the reactive female system is codependent. And you know, it's a one-on-one match. And then the emerging female system is a healthy, functioning culture that we're trying to evolve, I think. And then later on, I call the white male system the TMM culture, the technological, mechanistic, materialistic culture, because I think that the science that we have developed, you know, that most people, if you say science, they think of Western culture science as science, but there's Chinese science, there's Navajo science, they're all approaches to science, and our Western culture is the one that's most based on materialism, the material plane and technology. And so I've come to believe that science itself, as we know science in Western culture, TMM science, is very much involved in creating this addictive system. And so in order for us to heal, ultimately to heal, not just as individuals, but as a society, culture, that we're going to have to challenge our science and our religious belief systems, because they're created to support this addictive system. So it's a pretty big job, and I think it's important because as people recover, like in the 12-step program, I think the 12-step program is great. And I think it's the best tool we have for recovering from addictions. And it was created by addicts for addicts. So it can only go so far. And when you really, recovery is not just not drinking or just not using. Recovery is total. And when you recover totally, you can see that you have to move beyond just not drinking. You have to make a complete change in the way you live, the way you think, the way you feel, and challenge our science and technology. And so it's big. And it's absolutely vitally important if we want the human species. I now see it as a disease of choice of the human species that we're trying to impose on the rest of the world. And we have other choices. We have other choices which we need to make. So to me, it's a big thing. And it starts with each individual doing our personal recovery. And the best tool for that, in my experience, is the 12-step program.
You call this healing journey living in the process. Could you explain what this means?
I was trained as traditional therapist. And I did my doctoral work in psychology. And I was always hungry. I now think of psychotherapists as people who are looking for answers. At least that's the way I was. And I checked out I studied with Fritz Perls and Gestalt. You know, he was challenging the usual traditional system. I was in the 60s then, and the 70s. And I studied with Virginia Satir. I thought she was brilliant. Virginia and I used to argue all the time. She didn't want me to mention addiction because it alienated people. She was a true codependent. And she didn't want me to say anything that alienated anybody. Well, I can't exist without saying something that alienates somebody, for heaven's sake. But I loved what Virginia did because she said, I don't think she said it directly, but what I got from what Virginia said was that we exist in context, because therapy before that had been working with the individual person. But Virginia said, no, you can't do that, just that, because you have a family and you're in that context. And I remember one of the exercises she used to have was she would tie, when she was working with a family, she would tie all of them together. And she would ask them to walk across the room. And it was always hilarious because, of course, usually the father would try to direct them how to do it. And then someone, the wife, including the kids, would rebel and they would push the other way. And what they might learn if they were really alert is that they needed each other. You know, they had to work together just to get across that room. And I loved it because sometimes they got it, sometimes they didn't, but it was always hysterical watching them. And who took charge and who knew what to do and who was controlling and who was passive, and a lot of stuff came out. But I took it further that we also live in the context of our community. All the people that I work with have experienced trauma in schools, in churches, in social clubs, on the baseball team, you know, everybody. And it's just so much bigger. And then if you look at that, or in your relationship, for example. And so I said, we've got to look at all your contexts. We have to look at your relationship. We have to look at your family. We have to look at your community. We have to look at your culture and your society. And we have to look at your planet, you know, and what you need to recover from all of those. And I work with people all over the world. And when I first started coming to Germany, there wasn't a person who came to my workshops who wasn't still dealing with the Second World War and the shame and the anger. And in my culture, for example, the Cherokee culture, it's in your genes to respect your elders. I mean, you just do that. It's who you are. And I came over here and we would line up to eat and people would push the elders out of the way and to get in line. You know, the behavior was terrible. And then one time we used to still have them, international gathering of Native elders where I invite people who've been important to me, teachers, Native people from all over the world. I invite them to come to Boulder Hot Springs in Montana, which is our center, and teach us. And the first time I did that, I was so embarrassed with my people, the people who are working with me in the living and process work and trying to become whole. And that's how they behaved. They went and put their books and their purses and their stuff on the best seats in the house, you know. And then we try to line up for meals, and they got in front of the guests and the elders. I'd never seen that behavior before. I was like, who are you people? I was so embarrassed. It was like having your children misbehave in public. You know, it's what it was like for me. And so I called for a meeting of just the Living in Process Network people who were working with me. And I just reamed them out. I dumped on them. And I said, I am so ashamed of you, embarrassed the way you're behaving. And I just went on, and I had a tantrum. I had a tantrum on them. Sometimes it's okay. And then I looked up, and half the group's crying. And I said, what's going on? And it was the Germans who were so great. And they said, our elders were Nazis. How can you tell us to respect them? They were Nazis. And we have shame. We want to forget that. We don't. And I said, they were your elders. They are your elders. You respect them. You don't have to be them. You have to respect them, or you won't be whole unless you respect your elders. And that was one of the quantum leaps our Living in Process Network made, I think, when they started just acting at first, like they had respect for the elders who were there. And now over here, the elders go first. The elders get the best chairs. You know, and it's made such a difference, just that one little thing of respecting the elders. And so I see now, and a lot of times I do things and I don't know why I do them, but I started working with people all over the world, and they're all part of the Living in Process work. And each country has a different set of things they need to recover from. So they have to recover from their own culture. And it's so helpful that we're doing it internationally, because I'll say to someone, oh, that is so Kiwi. You're acting just like a New Zealander. And I say, what is that? What do you mean? Well, the New Zealanders have a whole personality. The Germans have a whole personality. The Germanic culture has a whole personality. And they see that this person I feel very close to, that are doing their personal work and recovering from their addictions, they have a different set of problems than I do because of where they grew up. And so we're working on all those levels at the same time. And you ask about the Living in Process work, to me it has three components. First is you have to deal with whatever addictive process you've consumed and you act out of. Because if you don't have enough of you to be available to really heal. You know, so you have to do that. And that's tough. That's tough. And as related to that, it's not part of our story, as related to that, each of us has experienced personal trauma in various situations, and in our families, and sexual abuse, and bullying, and brainwashing by institutions, and we have to deal with that. And to me, this is one of the most exciting things I do, because it is so wonderful that in our cells we carry that memory. We carry that trauma memory. And so it's there to be healed and worked with. If it disappeared, we couldn't grow. We couldn't heal. But it's there. And so, you know, no matter what happened to you, my experience is it can heal. And I discovered it was actually a group of women that taught me about what I call now deep process work. I was asked to do this workshop for a group of women whose husbands were in training to be facilitators. And so they said, will you work with the women? I said, sure, no problem. Oh my, were these women angry? Oh, they were furious. And I remember a friend of mine and I were facilitating the group together, and we were going to do collages and you know, simple things, and just try to get them in touch with being a woman. And well, these women were furious. They were absolutely furious, and they were so full of pain that I could hardly stand it. And the minute we opened the door a crack, these women rushed through like a mob. And luckily we had pads and mattresses and things out, and they yelled and they screamed and they cried and they beat the pillows and they howled. And we were so appalled that we had no idea what to do. And so we did nothing. We just sat with them. And the two of us, I can remember, I can still see it in my mind, at the breaks, we would put our arms around each other and stagger to our cabin. We were at a retreat center at a cabin. And we would flop on the bed. I don't think we ate the whole weekend. We were just trying to recover enough to get back to the next session. And the same thing would go on. And we just sat with these women. And of course what happened is I realized my own pain and rage. And it was so cleansing. It was like a celestial enema to get it out. And to sit with the others while they did. Everybody became the therapist, you know. Nobody was the therapist. I was on the mats. She was on the mats. Everybody. And I thought, this is different. You know, I had watched Fritz Perls and Barry Stevens do Gestalt work, and they would like get people to stretch out and beat the mats, but it was controlled and it was contrived. This wasn't. It was like a river, a dam burst. And what I saw happen was they bypassed their thinking mind. They bypassed their controls and their conceptualizing, and they went right to their being. And whatever was there just came out. And literally at the end of the weekend, I was like in a basket. The two of us were, what happened? But I knew I'd seen something and I'd learned something. And it took me several years to get past my Gestalt training and all that, where I thought I was essential, or I thought I had to keep control. I just had to witness, be there and participate and keep them safe. That's all. And what would happen is they would discover things. They would discover memories of being molested, or they would discover memories from other lives. And sometimes they were howling for their ancestors and healing them. And I thought, my God, this is genetic. It's bigger than just one person. You know, and that's what I call the deep process work now. And I just love it. I love it when I have a deep process come up. And I love it when other people do, because you transcend time and space, the limitation of time and space. And sometimes we are healing our ancestors. I think we really are genetically healing our ancestors. But we're bringing healing memories that we can't even remember. But our body has stored them, which is, it's fantastic that our body stores them, you know. So, like with all of this, it's not something I went looking after. It's something that I noticed when it came to me. That's the work I do, and then I follow it up. And so that's the second piece of the living process work, is of the recovery and the deep process. And then the third piece is that even if we're not doing it consciously, we're in the process of making a paradigm shift. And to me, that means that we are building new societies. We're building new ways for the human species to be with themselves, with each other, and on this planet. And it's not all conscious. And it's so interesting to see, like, to watch the Australians watch the Germans struggle with their German brainwashing, and then watch the Germans watch the Australians study with their Australian brainwashing, you know. And they see it's bigger than themselves. And one of the things I find is that some people say, look, I just want a normal life, or I want a personal life. I don't want to have to do this much work. I feel sad for those people, because I figure they're going to have another lifetime. They're going to have to work on the same issues. But those people, and you saw some of them here this week, and they've got something. You know, they've got something that you don't find in other people. And they're living much wholer life than they did when they started doing this work. So I just feel like the work that Pete and I do, sorry he's not on camera, but he's very essential. And the rest of the work in the network, it's just so, I feel honored. I feel honored to be able to do this work. And I feel that it's a privilege. As you know, I was having a gallbladder attack and had to decide whether to come over here or not. And I thought, you know, I'm committed. I meet with this group every year here in Brad Hare and Robin. I'm going to be there if I have to. I thought I might have to be on a mat or a bed, because when I sit up, I have more pain. But I was going to be here because I really believe in this work. And it's not something I contrived, or it's not a bunch of techniques, or it's something that came out of my willingness to be open to what I was being shown each step of the way. And when you say your work, I think I corrected you, or somebody I corrected said our work, because everything I've learned from the people I work with. You know, my formal education wasn't that helpful, frankly. I think it may have gotten in the way. And I continue, and I think our job as humans is to heal and grow and learn, and especially to grow spiritually, to become more fully who we can be. And I don't mean religiously, I mean spiritually, and I don't know what all that means. But that's the work I'm doing, and I'm privileged. I'm privileged to be doing it, and I love it. And it's changed. You know, I used to think that my old therapy training, I thought, if I'm not in control and I don't know what's going on with that person, then, you know, like I looked at the ethics of psychology and I'm legally responsible to know what's going on with that person. Well, I don't. You know, it's so different. I don't know what's going on. I can be with them. I can accompany them, but I don't have to know. And I used to think I had to sit with everyone when they did their deep process work. Now people go off and do it by themselves, or they ask someone to sit with them that they feel like they may get, you know, but they don't need me. It's their work. They do it at home. And it works. That's what I like about it. It works. And what I finally came to believe is that as a psychotherapist, that I was trained to help people adjust to a sick society and learn to live in it. And this work helps them not to accept it, a sick society, and to become whole and perhaps create something different. So, I don't know if this was enough about recovery, but to me it's about individuals, families, communities, the species recovering to become more whole.
About what you said, respecting the elders. I mean, for example, in cases, there are so many cases of child abuse, for example, in families. And how could one come to the point to respect the families when there had been child abuse by the other generations?
I think you respect elders for yourself. Something happens to you when you respect elders, and you become a different person. So that's one piece. But the other piece is that that person who is the molester is sick, and probably 9 times out of 10 has been molested themselves as a child. And we have such a focus on punishment in this culture, and people saying that they can, what's the word they use, that they can be relieved or have closure. That's, you know, if the person gets punished, that's not closure. That doesn't do it. I think that closure is compassion. And carrying that anger and that hatred, that's in you. That's not that person, that's in you. And only you can do something about that. And in my own experience, compassion made the difference. That I see that that person made mistakes just like I made mistakes. And I see that that person wasn't clear and was struggling with their own whatever, demon sexuality. And I guess, you know, I was raised as a Christian, but the whole judge not lest ye be judged is important. I don't feel like that's my place. And I can't do that. I can't think myself into it. I have to do my work, deal with my pain, deal with my anger, deal with my distortions, whatever I need to deal with. And then I don't need to hate that person. I don't need to. And it's not good for me, and it's not good for them. And when I do my work, I shift, and I get a larger perspective. And I know I used to work with a lot of cult survivors, and there was this whole kind of thing that if you didn't like punish them, report them, etc., you couldn't heal. And I just thought therapists were way off track there, way off track. And basically they're irrelevant to your healing. You do your healing, and then you have a different perspective. And so I think if you just keep the focus on what you need to do with and for yourself, it's like being in a tunnel. And there'll be a day when you step outside the tunnel and everything looks different than it did in the tunnel. But hating someone and holding on to anger and holding on to resentment, that only hurts you. That only hurts you. It doesn't hurt the other person, or it may or may not. But so it's like, I'm going to keep hold of this poison because it's mine. Nobody heals with that. Deal with your poison. Don't spew it on others. So that's what I've seen. That's my own experience. You know, in the 12-step program, I think one of the most revolutionary things about the 12-step program is the concept of staying on your own side of the street. And no matter what happens to you, looking at your part in it. And so you can say, okay, I was a baby and I was sexually molested. What part could I possibly have? Well, probably not that much. But holding on to it, you could have a part. And so do your work and then see if the world looks different to you when you come out the other side. That's what's important to you, to do your work. Not to have this goal in mind, or not to think it has to look like this. Or that's the whole problem with psychotherapy, is they think they know how it has to look like. You don't know. That's what living in process is. You don't know. You have to participate. You have to be honest. I think humility helps a lot. And you have to be grateful. I like gratitude a lot too. Gratitude heals the soul. And I've seen people who've been through awful, awful, awful experiences. And when they do their work, they're some of the most grateful people I know. So it's magic. It's magic to do your own work, to do your own recovery. The other people are irrelevant to that. Okay?
Thanks a lot for your deep insight and deep wisdom. Thanks a lot. What do you think? Do you think one can overcome addiction 100%?
One of the reasons it's so difficult to recover from addiction is because everything around you invites you back into it. You know, the ads on television, if you're a sex addict, or if you're a workaholic, everything, the culture demands that you be an addict. And one of the things I've learned, which has been really hard for me to learn, is I'm not an addict. He laughs at me sometimes because, well, like with that woman in the workshop who, you know, and I was like, and Pete said he just was feeling crazy. But he's taught me so much, and some of the people in the network, and I spotted her immediately. She was her addictive thinking, you know. And Trump is he's an adult child of an alcoholic and a dry drunk. He'd be better off. We'd all be better off if he drank, because he's so angry that he doesn't drink. But he's clearly an addict. And so Pete said, boy, you nailed that. You know, well, addicts are different. And I hate to say that, but there's something different. I don't know, you know, a lot of people say it's a chemical thing, I don't know. But he laughs at me sometimes because I don't understand addicts. And he'll say, I understand. You know, I understand what they're thinking. I understand what they're feeling. I understand exactly, because that's me. And he said, you're not like that. You know, and he says it with a bit of a but it's true. So I think, yeah, you are an addict. But part of that is maybe genetic, is what they say in AA, but part of it is the culture is constantly seducing you back into it. And this has only been something I've learned in the last few years, because I realized that one of my faults and virtues, greatest fault, greatest virtue, is that I want, I don't know how to say this, I want to be like everyone else, or I want to believe that everyone else is like me. They're not. They're not. And it's taken me a long time to let that go. And be appreciative of the differences. I never thought of myself as a really smart person. I made pretty good grades, and but I never thought of myself as brilliant. But what I've done with what I have, I think, is brilliant. Now, I can say that with all humility. But I think I bent over backwards to be like everyone. And I was raised as an Irish, Cherokee, English, in Indian country. I'm not like everybody. I'm not. And I think it's acceptance of reality to say, I'm an alcoholic and I'm in recovery, but I'm still an alcoholic. And the minute you think you're not, you're going to think that you can do what. See, alcoholics laugh at me. I've never been very interested in drinking. I'm not like the taste of it. I often used to order a glass of wine and then not drink it. And they think that's funny. That's unimaginable for an alcoholic. But I'm just not that interested. So I do think there's something different. And I think the ones who deny that are going to get in trouble. That's what I think. It's just like, I'll probably always have the possibility of something going on with my gallbladder. For me to try to say, no, I'm going to be completely well, that I don't have a unhappy gallbladder. So this is only my second time. Everybody thought I would have a regular series, but for me to, then I have to accept that reality, which means I don't eat a lot of bacon and sausage and things like that. So, okay, that's my reality. So, to me, it's a good thing to say, this is my reality. I just don't need to go near alcohol. And I've learned a whole way of thinking that goes with that I have to watch out for because I'm more vulnerable than someone else might be. I think it's a good thing.
For me, it's like, I'm recovered in, to say I overcame some kind of addictions like nicotine addiction, and also the how do you say, the addiction to hurt myself. So, and this is completely over since 20 years. Completely over. No desire, nothing. But there is some points of addiction, like some parts of my addiction, like eating disorder, which is still ongoing. But I would like to come to this point, like with nicotine addiction, that it doesn't matter anymore. It's not a topic anymore. It's really, it's gone. Like, and I would. My aim is to come to this point, but but still staying in recovery, but overcoming addiction.
But your weakness is your need to control, and that's your disease.
Yes.
That's your disease. Your thinking, that kind of thinking is going to lead you into trouble. And so, to me, see, I think because of the way I was raised, I was constantly in touch with the Creator, the higher power. And that's natural for me to go back to that. It's not natural for most addicts to go back to that. It has to be relearned every day to know that you have something that's involved in your life that is more powerful than your disease. And that has to be relearned every day. I don't have to relearn that. I don't. It is so clear to me that whenever I just stop, it's there. you know, and I see Pete have to remember it, and especially with food, because you have to eat. There's no way you can, you know, you can give up alcohol, but you can't give up food. And to know that you have there's something that has your back, someone, something, and that you don't have to have your back. You can't be in control of it. And that's recovery. That's recovery. And you know, they say it's been lifted, the desire's been lifted. That's recovery to me. And for me, it's like trusting my process and living out of that. Well, take money, for example. You know, I'm always spending money and making money, and you know, I think what I did is I wanted to be just a common addict. But so I've been on the other side of this. It's like I've had to come to know I'm not. I learned codependence. I learned that. But I don't think like an addict. I mean, Pete just tells me this all the time, and other people too who know me. I don't think like an addict. I don't act like an addict. I don't see the world like an addict. You know, and I've had to work not only to understand that, because I said the other night, I think it can't be understood because it's crazy. I got that very early on. But I've tried to understand how it works, you know. But for the truth for me is I'm not. And I don't know why I'm different. I think it's because of my raising and, you know, but most people were brought up in this culture. See, I wasn't brought up in this culture, and I do think that's part of it.
Yeah, for me, it's this constant working on the first step. It's of this constant letting go, don't try to achieve something. And sometimes if I'm in struggle, for example, with eating, you know, I overeat. And if then I come to the point, okay, let it go, just enjoy what you are doing and not judging myself, now you are in a relapse or something like that. If I can just be in this moment of, okay, now I'm overeating, now it's like that, and then I can let go, and then I'm in the first step, and then everything stops to be a struggle, and everything changes just by this, okay, being in the moment, and okay, this is like that, and so don't fight against this, fighting against my own addiction. This is the worst addiction, maybe.
Most people never do the first step. This is, my story is when I thought, okay, I'm going to work the steps, because I started going to 12-step meetings. That's how I started learning about addiction. I started going to 12-step meetings. I nearly died of smoke inhalation. I'm allergic to smoke. It was nearly killed me. And I would try to get by a window or something. And I took my yellow tablet because I was going to take notes and see why this thing worked. And I, never got that. So then, and this is one of the major changes, shifts in my life, was I got that I was trying to get the 12 steps up here. And what I got was, I'm never going to get this if I don't do it. So I got myself a sponsor, even though I wasn't an addict. I got myself a sponsor, and I was going to work the steps and participate. Participate, that's my thing. Participate, then you learn. And so I took the first step, and I read, I am powerless, and I thought, fuck this shit. I am a feminist. I will never, ever be powerless again. Nobody could tell me I'm powerless. And I was stuck there. And here's where I think I differ from a lot of addicts because I could not move on. I was stuck on that part of the first step for 2.5 years. I couldn't go any further. And I was honest, and this I think, I was honest enough to stay stuck. And I just couldn't do it. I couldn't say I was powerless. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And then what happened, I saw over alcohol. Oh, well, I'm not powerless over alcohol, but I can say I'm powerless over my addiction, because that's what addiction is something you're powerless over. So I cut the first part, and then I couldn't do the second part. It was another year or so, and my life has become unmanageable. No codependent has an unmanageable life. It can be chaotic, painful, awful, and terrible, but it's not unmanageable. And so I was stuck there. So the first step took me almost 3 years. But when I got it, when I put it all together and said, now it makes sense to me, I got it. I've got it, you know? And what I see is most people in recovery don't have the first step. And so they keep falling back on control and the illusion of control, as I say. And what's the other piece? Basically, self-centeredness and control. And I've been in a battle with some AA people lately because they say I'm too rigid about this and that you just need to go through the steps. And I think that's just another con. If you say I've done the first step and you don't really get that you're powerless and you don't really accept it, then you haven't done the first step and everything else doesn't count. You know, so I don't know where that stands because they say I'm too rigid about that, but I do believe that most people don't get the first part of the first step. And they lie about it, which is the disease, is to lie. And then they struggle. And so I don't know what to do with that. I don't really, and Pete's not a lot of help. But that's where I think, you know, because the issue is coming back to the illusion of control, coming back to the illusion, I want to be able to control. I want to make my life the way I want it. And that's the issue. And to me, the answer is, I grew up knowing that I had a higher power. I grew up knowing that higher power was my boss. And that my job was, as best I could do it, was to participate in my life and look for clues as to where I needed to go. And that I would never be in control. I knew that. And I think that's the difference. Pete keeps saying, you're different. And I think that was it. And I always have said my living process is my higher power. And I have to participate, but I don't control it. So that's what, you know, for me. But I do see that. And I would like to find some way for, I don't want people to con the first step. I don't want people to lie the first step and then just move on. And I'm getting a lot of flack about that right now from some AA people. But I do think that's the problem, some way.
Yeah. I have always this picture of there is a water and I have to jump into it and decide to jump into it and then to let me carry, not to do something, just to let life show me how it works.
And that's what the living process.
This is all day, not exercise, but I try challenge. Yeah. Not to fight against something, not to run, not do efforts, but jump in it.
And I don't, like there was, who was, I think maybe it was Wolf or maybe it was someone else, but in a workshop there was, he was like a reed in the wind. You know, that's not for me, that's not participating either. That's being blown about. Living in process is not taking responsibility and making choices. It's not that, but it's trusting your process, trusting that more will be revealed than you could ever possibly come upon yourself. If you, when you say I've done so many things, and I say I've done so many, I've just done everything that came along pretty much in this life. I think I may not have to do another life because I've done so well this time. But I think that's what we don't do. It's like we take pieces and I just, when I stop and I look at the people I've met, famous people, not famous people, amazing. I say I'm friends with. When I went to do my internship in New York, my then husband, was going back to finish his seminary work. I'd finished my doctoral work, so I needed to do an internship. And so I applied in these hospitals, and I ended up going to Bellevue Hospital in New York, which is famous. I didn't know it was famous.
Me neither.
Yeah, well, and Dr. Wexler, who developed all the intelligence tests, he was my boss. And so the very first minute I get in there, I hear this booming in the next room. His voice was just booming. He was a big man, he spoke right, "Where's that little girl from the Midwest? I want to see who I've accepted sight unseen." Well, I'm sitting here, I'm 21, 22, so I'm young, and I'm in New York, and I'm from the Midwest, and I'm sitting here with all these New Yorkers who are also interns, and he's singling me out in front of them. I thought, Jesus Christ, this is going to be fun. And so everybody knows that he made a special thing for me to be one of their contemporaries, And then he chooses me to be his special research assistant. He says, you have the background, you have, the scientific background and everything, because I was a pre-med. And so he chooses me. I loved him. He was so great to work with. He was so brilliant. And he developed the WIPSI test I developed with him. I'm this little kid from the Midwest. I barely dry behind the ears, And this is what my life has been. Just one thing after another, after another. And if I had planned it, I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have nearly had the experience I've had, the people I've met. We meet people in street corners in New York. They start talking to us. Pete has this fabulous, remember how my name is blah, 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 my phone number is blah, blah, blah. I'd like to keep in touch. 2 years later, I'll say to Pete, who was that guy, you remember? And Pete remembers his name and his phone number. He's amazing. And we call him, and he's president of WA and wants to talk about WA, it's just, and I think it's because I don't get in my own way. It's because I trust my process that it will be better than anything that I could think of, or well, it has been. I mean, my life reads like a fairy tale, really. And I haven't planned any of it. I've been participating in my process and available to participate in my process. And that's all I've done. So I think works, but you have to trust. So I see all of us who are trying to grow and heal and learn and who are in recovery, I see all of us as on our backs, we have the responsibility to build a new planet that works and new people that work. So that's all I'm about.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for your honesty, for your constant research you are doing, and your courage to go ahead of us. And thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening to me. I'm obviously very excited.